Welcome. You're listening to Detective Duo, bringing you tales from the golden age of mystery, adventures in the spirit of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. Tap subscribe to stay with us and share where in the world you're listening from. It began, as grand evenings so often do, with the polite clatter of silver and the faint hum of gossip behind fans. Berkeley House, Lady Rowena Chalcott's London townhouse, glowed like a cut gem that night, each crystal facet of its chandelier scattering light across marble and brocade. A string quartet murmured near the dais, their bows rising and falling with the delicate discipline of servants in prayer. Tuppence Beresford stood just inside the entrance to the ballroom, adjusting her emerald satin gloves and taking in the scene with sharp delight. "One chandelier," she murmured, tilting her chin toward the ceiling, and an entire room pretending not to notice its trembling. Tommy followed her gaze, expression amused. "Nerves, darling. Chandeliers don't tremble. Guests do." "Perhaps, but they also don't usually have missing crystals." He leaned closer. "You've spotted that already." "I make a hobby of noticing what's missing," she said lightly, and turned to greet a passing waiter with a smile that could melt suspicion into confession. The evening had all the trappings of luxury and none of the warmth. Lady Rowena, in silver lace, presided at the head of the table, her smile as precise as a blade. She had gathered London's finest under the banner of charity for war orphans, though even Tommy, who disliked cynicism, suspected more politics than philanthropy in the air. As the final course arrived, champagne jelly trembling in cut glass, Tuppence caught a snatch of conversation from behind a column. A man's voice, low and clipped, hissed, "You've had your payment. Let the matter rest." The reply came sharp and bitter. "Not while debts remain, especially yours." Tuppence turned slightly. The speakers stood half-hidden behind a palm. Sir Montague Havisham, an industrialist known for his patriotic donations, and Lord Dalrymple, his long-time rival in business and rumour. Their eyes met like crossed swords before they withdrew into polite laughter, masks replaced. Tommy joined her. "You're frowning again." "I'm thinking," she said. "Always dangerous, isn't it?" He smiled. "For someone else, usually." A few minutes later, Lady Rowena rose for her toast. "To old friends," she announced, crystal flute in hand, "and to old debts repaid." The orchestra paused. A ripple went through the guests, a single tremor of curiosity and unease. Sir Montague, standing directly beneath the chandelier, lifted his glass. "To the future," he said evenly. The lights shimmered. The crystal above blazed white for a moment, dazzlingly beautiful, and then a sound like a gasp escaped the crowd. Sir Montague staggered. His glass fell and shattered at his feet. A scream, high, sharp, split the ballroom. The quartet ceased mid-note. Lady Rowena's hand flew to her throat. "Sir Montague!" He was on the floor, motionless, eyes fixed on nothing. The chandelier swayed gently above him, as if sighing. Tommy pushed through the onlookers kneeling beside the fallen man. "Call for a doctor," he commanded, though his tone suggested the effort was already too late. Tuppence crouched beside him, her gloved fingers hovering near the body. "No wound," she whispered. "No blood." Her gaze lifted, first to the man's untouched collar, then upward. "But something's wrong with the chandelier. Look, the lower ring." Tommy followed her eyes. A gap glimmered amid the crystals, one pendant missing like a tooth. The house physician arrived within minutes, brisk and unconvincing. "Heart failure," he pronounced after a perfunctory examination. "These things happen, I'm afraid." "Conveniently," murmured Tuppence. Tommy straightened, noting the faintest scent. Ozone, sharp and metallic, almost masked by perfume and candle smoke. He looked around. Servants stood frozen. Guests murmured about shock and tragedy. But somewhere near the orchestra, a woman in blue silk slipped quietly toward the exit, her head bowed. Lady Rowena, pale beneath her rouge, addressed the room. "Please, everyone, remain calm. It's a dreadful shock, but we must not forget the purpose of this evening. Sir Montague would wish us to continue with dignity." The orchestra struck a tentative chord. Conversation resumed in muted waves, though laughter was now brittle as spun glass. Tuppence leaned close to her husband. "I suppose we should feel comforted by her composure." Tommy's expression was unreadable. She's hosting a corpse, not a dinner. They remained until the first guests began drifting away, coats reclaimed, voices lowered. The chandelier no longer swayed, though its remaining crystals trembled faintly in the draught. Tuppence found herself drawn to it, staring upward. If chandeliers could talk, she mused, I imagine this one would whisper secrets. Or confess to murder, Tommy added dryly. Then let's listen carefully. Later that night, the Beresfords' taxi rattled through Mayfair, the city outside polished to anonymity by lamplight. Tuppence was unusually quiet, her gloved hands resting in her lap. Say it, Tommy prompted. She turned to him. It wasn't natural, Tommy. The man didn't so much fall as fold, as though something stopped him mid-breath. And that light, it flared just before he collapsed. Faulty wiring, perhaps. Perhaps, she echoed, unconvinced. But that missing crystal bothers me. You saw it too. He nodded. One pendant gone out of hundreds. And one man dead out of dozens. Funny sort of symmetry. He chuckled softly. You think the chandelier's to blame? I think, she said, looking out at the blurred shop fronts, that people often hide their sins in things that sparkle. The following morning, London's papers reported the event with decorum and dullness. Society shocked by sudden death of philanthropist. No mention of electricity or missing crystals, only polite tributes to Sir Montague's generosity. Tuppence sat at the breakfast table, the paper folded precisely in half. Heart failure, she read aloud. At 58, in perfect health. How tiresome of hearts to fail so conveniently. Tommy looked up from buttering toast. We weren't invited to investigate, darling. True, she said, buttering hers with unusual vigour. But curiosity, as you remind me, is my only vice. He grinned. And I married you knowing the risk. They shared a brief laugh, then fell silent as the doorbell rang. A uniformed messenger handed Tommy a sealed envelope marked Confidential, Scotland Yard. Inside lay a note from Inspector Craddock. Between ourselves, the coroner isn't satisfied. No poison detected, yet the cause remains uncertain. Heart intact. I'm told you two were present. Care to lend unofficial eyes? Tuppence's eyes sparkled. Unofficial eyes? How flattering. More like unpaid, Tommy said, folding the note. But it seems we're back in business. She rose, smoothing her skirt. Then I shall wear the emerald satin again. If we're to play detectives, we might as well look suspicious. He sighed affectionately. We'll begin with Lady Rowena. She looked as though she'd seen a ghost. Or caused one, Tuppence said, reaching for her hat. As they left, sunlight spilled across the breakfast table, glinting briefly on a crystal vase. The light fractured into small rainbows across the wall. Beautiful, ordinary, harmless. Tuppence paused, her gaze lingering on the shimmer. You know, she said thoughtfully, sometimes the prettiest things hide the most shocking secrets. Tommy smiled. Then let's see what Berkeley House looks like in daylight. And with that, the case pressed forward, not with thunder or fog, but with two curious minds, a vanished pendant, and a house that glittered too brightly for comfort. That evening, the Beresfords' flat transformed into a miniature detective bureau. The napkin lay sealed in an envelope beside Tommy's notebook. Tuppence perched on the arm of the sofa, her gaze distant. Lady Rowena was calm, she mused. Too calm, almost relieved. But the butler, he was nervous, terrified I'd noticed something. Tommy jotted notes. Motive? She hosted the event, and Havisham insulted her husband's memory last year at a club dinner. But poison at a public ball? That's theatrical, even for revenge. Unless, Tommy suggested, she wanted the world to see him die. Tuppence considered this. Possible, but then why the chandelier? Why that peculiar flash before he fell? I swear the light changed for an instant. Tommy looked up. Electric fault, perhaps. She smiled faintly. You said that last time, and yet the chandelier swayed after he fell, not before. He leaned back, studying her. You think the two are connected? I think, she said, rising, that whoever killed Havisham wanted it to look like an act of fate. Lightning from heaven, death from beauty. The perfect irony. Tommy grinned. You have the soul of a dramatist. Or a realist, she countered, because murder, Tommy dear, is rarely content with subtlety. It likes a little performance. The telephone rang again near midnight. Tommy answered, yawning. Beresford residence. He listened, his expression tightening. Ah, Craddock. You've tested it? No trace of known poison, you say? Interesting. Thank you. He replaced the receiver and turned to Tuppence. Nothing conclusive. The powder contains trace elements. Metallic, he says. Possibly residue from something electrical. Her eyes widened. Electrical? Then perhaps the chandelier wasn't just for show. Tommy exhaled. You're imagining again. Of course I am, she said sweetly. That's how I get to the truth. As the clock struck 1, Tuppence stood by the window, looking out over the sleeping street. Below, a lamplighter made his last round, his torch reflecting briefly in the glass like a spark caught in crystal. She spoke softly, half to herself. A woman in blue silk, a butler too careful, a dead man beneath a chandelier. It's all a pattern, Tommy. We just haven't seen the full design yet. He smiled from the armchair. You'll dream of chandeliers now, I suppose. I shall dream of motives, she said, turning away, and of the woman who ran from the light before the darkness fell. Lady Rowena will see you now. The butler's tone carried the faint chill of disapproval as he drew aside a length of heavy velvet that framed the morning room at Berkeley House. Sunlight slanted across the parquet floor, picking out the gilt edges of portraits and the soft gleam of crystal decanters. Tuppence had always thought there was something melancholy about grandeur in daylight. It showed the polish and none of the charm. Lady Rowena Chalcott rose from a fainting couch upholstered in lavender silk. Her beauty was undeniable, though sharpened by fatigue. She extended one pale hand. Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, isn't it? You were present at the charity dinner. Tommy bowed slightly. At your invitation, Lady Rowena, and might I say, despite the tragic conclusion, it was a memorable evening. Her lips tightened. Tragic, yes. Poor Sir Montague. I still can scarcely believe it. Tuppence accepted a seat beside her, crossing her legs with deliberate ease. One never expects death to arrive in formal wear, does one? Rowena gave a brittle laugh. Indeed. She reached for her cigarette case, but her hands trembled slightly. It was all such a shock. The doctors say it was his heart, of course. Of course, Tommy said, his tone courteous but non-committal, though the yard seems less certain. A flicker passed through her eyes, surprise quickly replaced by poise. You've spoken to them? Merely socially, said Tuppence. We're old friends with Inspector Craddock. Ah, Lady Rowena tapped ash delicately into a porcelain dish. Then you know as much as I do, I'm afraid. Tuppence leaned forward, voice gentle but probing. Forgive me, Lady Rowena, but you seemed distressed when Sir Montague collapsed, not only by the shock, but as if it stirred some older grief. The hostess's eyes dropped to her lap. I lost my husband 3 years ago, Mrs. Beresford. The sight of sudden death, it has a way of reopening old wounds. Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. Your husband knew Sir Montague, didn't he? Rowena hesitated just long enough to confirm the importance of the question. Casually, she said. They were in business together for a time before my husband's accident. Ah, yes, said Tuppence softly. The boating accident on the Thames. Lady Rowena's cigarette paused halfway to her lips. How curious you should remember that. I have an inconvenient memory for details, Tuppence replied with a small smile, and perhaps a woman's curiosity about other women who manage so gracefully after tragedy. The silence that followed was a little too tight to be comfortable. Outside the window, a gardener's rake scraped rhythmically against gravel. Rowena stood abruptly. If you'll excuse me, I have letters to write. The staff can show you out. Tommy rose at once, bowing. Thank you for your time, Lady Rowena. We're deeply sorry for your loss and for the disruption. She nodded stiffly and turned away. As the Beresfords stepped into the corridor, Tuppence murmured, When people refuse to answer, they usually have more to say than they realize. Tommy smirked. And you got all that from a trembling cigarette? From a woman rehearsing sorrow, she corrected. She's afraid, Tommy. Not guilty yet, but afraid. They had just reached the front hall when a flicker of colour caught Tuppence's eye, a flash of blue silk moving quickly down the servants' passage. She froze. Wait. What is it? The woman from last night. Without waiting for reply, she slipped through the open doorway into the narrow corridor, moving as quietly as her heels would allow. The scent of furniture polish and damp stone filled the air. Ahead, the woman in blue silk, her gown now hidden under a plain grey coat, hurried toward the servants' entrance. Tuppence paused behind a pillar, watching as the woman spoke briefly with a footman, then disappeared through the side gate into the street. Moments later, Tuppence emerged, her stride brisk. Tommy caught up outside. "You're not planning to chase her in heels, are you?" "Not chase, follow. There's a difference," she said, hailing a cab. "Marylebone Road, driver, and keep back about 100 yards from that woman ahead." The driver glanced in the mirror and nodded. "Right you are, miss." They followed the woman through the weaving mid-morning traffic. The city was awake now, street vendors shouting, buses grumbling, the faint clatter of milk churns from a side lane. At last, the blue silk stranger stopped at a drab row of flats opposite a tobacconist's. She fished for a key, glanced over her shoulder, and vanished inside. Tuppence gave the driver a coin and stepped out. "Now, my love," said Tommy, "what exactly is your plan?" "Burgle her." "Observe," Tuppence replied. "Women in my mother's sewing circle used to say, if you can't know a secret, wait until it burns itself out." She crossed the street, stopping by the tobacconist's display window. From there she had a clear view of the flat's lace-curtained window. Behind it a shape moved, a woman's silhouette framed by light. Through the thin veil of curtain, they saw her feeding papers into a small fire grate. The flames flared, consuming each sheet with quick hunger. Tommy murmured, "That looks promising." "Or disastrous," Tuppence said. "Depends on who the letter was meant for." The woman stood back, watching until the last ember faded, then disappeared deeper into the flat. When the door finally opened and she left, Tuppence waited a cautious minute before slipping inside. The hallway smelled of smoke and cheap perfume. "Quickly," she whispered. "Keep watch." Tommy sighed. "One of these days, Tuppence, curiosity will get you into dreadful trouble." "Of course it will," she said cheerfully, "but I'll be in excellent company." She stepped into the small parlour, its air still warm. On the hearth lay an iron grate faintly dusted with grey ash. Tuppence crouched, sifting through it with a handkerchief. Among the charred fragments, one corner of paper had survived, singed but legible. She held it to the light. The words were few but chilling. "Chandelier, before midnight, payment enclosed." Her pulse quickened. "Tommy?" He entered quietly, closing the door. "Found something?" She showed him the scrap. His eyes narrowed. So it was planned, and the chandelier was part of it. Tuppence nodded slowly. "Payment enclosed. That means someone hired her. She's a singer, if I remember right. Lorna Vale used to perform at the Embassy Club. Disappeared from the papers after a scandal last year." Tuppence's brow furrowed. A singer fallen from grace, suddenly attending a high society dinner under an alias. I smell blackmail. Tommy folded the paper into his pocket. "Let's go before the landlady catches us trespassing." As they stepped back into the street, Tuppence glanced up at the window where the curtains now hung still and silent. "Imagine it, Tommy. A chandelier as an accomplice. Murder from the ceiling down." He laughed under his breath. "You do have a poetic turn of mind." "Perhaps, but it's not poetry I'm after. It's proof." That evening, the Beresfords sat in their sitting room again, the city lights winking beyond the window. A small heap of notes and newspaper clippings lay on the coffee table between them. Tommy leaned back, pipe unlit. "So far, we have Lady Rowena concealing something about her late husband, a nervous butler, and a blue silk singer burning letters about chandeliers." "And a dead man," said Tuppence, "whose death seemed staged with all the finesse of a theatre production." She sipped her tea thoughtfully. "You know, Tommy, sometimes murder hides behind manners. The velvet curtain of good breeding, drawn just enough to hide the blood." Tommy smiled faintly. "Then we'd better start pulling at the fabric." She looked at the scrap of burnt letter resting between them. "Tomorrow," she said softly, "we'll find out who paid for that chandelier to glitter quite so murderously." Tommy always said useful conversations begin with a plate between them. "People confess over lunch," he remarked, straightening his tie in the restaurant mirror. "Dinner is for boasts, breakfast for regrets, but lunch is honest." Tuppence, removing her gloves with delicate precision, surveyed the white linen world of Grafton's Grill. The clink of cutlery and the hum of discreet business made an agreeable cover for secrets. "I'll remember that next time you put philosophy between yourself and a sandwich," she said. "What's the special truth on rye?" Their guest arrived on the stroke of one, Mr. Horace Dunbar, antiques dealer, neat as a varnished frame. He shook hands, bowed to tuppence, and slid into the banquette as if intrigue were part of the upholstery. "Your note mentioned a chandelier," he said, eyes bright. "The one at Berkeley House," Tuppence replied. "We were present when Sir Montague Havisham collapsed beneath it." "Tragic," Dunbar murmured, already curious. "Lady Rowena bought that piece last spring. Not a period original. Crystals are 18th century cut, but the frame is modern. A composite. Italian drops, Bohemian pears, English rosettes. The former chandelier was French Louis Philippe. Tasteful, unshowy. She sold it. Wanted a statement." "A statement of what?" Tuppence asked. "Resilience," Dunbar said, "or simply wealth. She insisted on special wiring. Her phrase, not mine." Tommy raised an eyebrow. "Special how?" "Discrete controls and additional circuits," Dunbar said. "I referred her to Illumina Works, a theatre outfit. Their foreman, Mr. Barker, installed a small junction box above the ceiling rows, separate feeds for tiers dimming on the lower ring, elaborate for a private ballroom." Soup arrived, clear and consoling. Tuppence spooned thoughts elsewhere. If one wished to do something mechanical, complexity would be useful. "I admire craft, not crime," Dunbar said wryly. "But yes, the frame and chain are metal. With a relay and courage, you could make the thing bite." "Any alterations after installation?" Tommy asked. "Only a chipped pendant replaced on the bottom ring. 11 months ago, if memory serves." Tuppence's gaze fixed on a point above their heads, as if the restaurant's lamps had become crystal. "There's a gap now. I counted it the night he fell." "You have the right eye," Dunbar said. 233 pendants on the lower ring. Remove one and the circle sulks." "Lady Rowena's circle sulks quite elegantly," Tuppence said. "Tell us about Barker." "Neat moustache, neat handwriting, proud of his work. Illumina keeps good men." The waiter tempted them with pudding. Tommy accepted lemon tart. Tuppence refused and then helped herself to half. The ritual softened edges. "The old French piece," Tommy said. "Any objections to its removal?" "Her late husband liked it," Dunbar replied. "Rowena wanted light that announced itself. Havisham applauded the new one, called it worthy of a pledge. I assumed philanthropy." "A pledge to whom?" Tuppence mused. "Perhaps not the orphans." Dunbar finished his coffee. One more detail. During installation, a fitter slipped. The safety chain held. Rowena insisted on fresh fittings and signed off the same day. "Safety chain," Tommy said. "Considerate architecture." Dunbar stood. "You didn't hear any of this from me. Take care with Rowena. She is braver than she looks." When he had gone, Tommy exhaled. Special wiring, junction box, replacement pendant, safety chain. "And a singer burning a letter," Tuppence added softly. "Shall we visit Illumina?" Illumina Works occupied a clean, brick-built warren of cables and lamp parts. On pegboards, coiled cords hung like tame serpents. Somewhere a drill purred with self-respect. A clerk looked up from a ledger. "Afternoon," Tommy said, with the air of a man spending money. "We were recommended by Lady Cholcott. Considering a chandelier for a country house. I admired the Berkeley installation." The name produced instant hospitality. "A fine job," the clerk said. "Mr. Barker oversaw it." "Could we peek at the specifications?" Tuppence asked, voice airy. "Diagrams help me pretend decisiveness." Flattered, the clerk produced a folder. Tommy scanned pages of tidy numbers, load calculations, earths and fuses, a neat pencil sketch of a compact junction box. "Here we are," he murmured. "Auxiliary feed to frame, pending client approval." "Approved," the clerk said. Her ladyship liked the idea of isolating the lower ring for a sparkle moment during the dance. Mr. Barker is rather an artist. "Did he return post-installation?" Tuppence asked. "Twice. Pendant replacement, then a demonstration of the dimming to the new butler." "Excellent service," Tuppence said gravely, as though the words contained no meaning. Outside, the day went on. Tuppence drew a breath that tasted of metal and soap. "Auxiliary feed to frame," she repeated. "That isn't mere dimming, it's opportunity. And a demonstration to the butler. Convenient." "Let's not hang the man yet," Tommy said. "Innocence is still for sale." "I always buy a little," she said, "but I check the change." They turned toward the underground, reconsidered, and hailed a cab. "Home," Tuppence ordered. "I deduce best among crumbs." The Beresford sitting room made an efficient workshop. On the table, sandwiches, pickles, and a sketch Tommy had drawn. Junction box, chain, lower ring. Beside it, Tuppence had scribbled possibilities. Timer, relay, contact, disguised fuse. "Suppose," she said, tapping contact, "a small current ran through the frame at a set moment. A person touches the metal, perhaps steadying a chair, while lifting a glass with a thin gilt rim." "Completing a circuit," Tommy said. "A jolt at precisely the wrong instant." "Craddock's lab found metallic traces on the napkin I pinched," Tuppence continued. "We thought powder. It could be residue from a contact paste." Tommy considered. "Our victim stood directly beneath the lowest ring when the toast was drunk. He lifted his glass. The light flared. If a relay engaged, then—" "The sparkle moment," Tuppence said. "Not the show, the switch." "And the missing crystal?" "A container," she said. "A capsule that once held a tiny device, a fuse, a weight, a trigger, removed after success." Tommy's pencil made a short, satisfied stroke. "We need Barker's hands and the butler's memory, also Lorna Vale's purpose. Her letter said Chandelier, before midnight, payment enclosed. She may have placed or removed something." Tuppence nodded. "Rowena insisted on special wiring. Either she desired spectacle, or she inherited a weapon in disguise." "Rowena's motive?" Tommy asked. "Blackmail? Charitable embezzlement? Havisham and Dalrymple perform politics together." "She feared something," Tuppence said, recalling the tremor behind the lavender poise. "But fear doesn't make one wire a murder. Someone else may have used her theatre." They ate in pragmatic silence. At last Tommy folded the sketch. "We test the theory. Tomorrow we see Barker. After that, the butler. If both play innocent, we coax truth from Lorna's song." "And tonight?" Tuppence asked. "Tonight we choose a strategy," he said. "I favour chronology. Who was where between 9 and midnight? Who could reach the junction box? Who handled the glasses?" "I favour people," Tuppence replied, "who lied by habit, who panicked too late, who watched the chandelier rather than the body." "Division of labour," Tommy said, pleased. "I'll count minutes. You'll count lies." She smiled. "And somewhere between arithmetic and instinct, murder will trip." He pushed the sandwiches toward her. "Have the last triangle. It improves intuition." "Selfless man," she said, taking it. "Tommy, do you notice how the details rhyme? A gap in the ring, a gap in the story, a safety chain preventing a fall, and the word pledge, it keeps shining." "Havisham's word," Tommy mused. "Perhaps a pledge to fund or to silence, perhaps a pledge that became a threat. If the chandelier was both stage and device, the toast was the curtain up." "In which case," Tuppence said, rising, "we must find the stage manager." Tommy reached for his hat. "Barker first." "And if Barker points upward?" she asked. "Then," he said, "we tug the safety chain and see who dangles." She laughed, the sound quick and confident. At the door she paused, touching the sketch with a fingertip. "Sparkle too bright," she murmured. "That's the trick with light. The eye follows it and misses the hand." "The hand," Tommy said, "wore a neat moustache, if Dunbar is right." "Or a maid's nerves, or a hostess's charm," Tuppence replied. "We'll know soon enough. Come along, Mr. Beresford. I intend to make the city confess over lunch again tomorrow." "And I," he said, "intend to order something conductive." "Order truth on rye," she said, sliding her arm through his. "It pairs nicely with justice." The maid looked as if she might apologize for existing. She stood in the servants' hall doorway of Berkeley House, cap slightly askew, wringing her hands around a crumpled handkerchief. "Mrs. Beresford?" she asked softly. "You wanted to speak to me?" Tuppence smiled in a way that encouraged confidences. "Yes, Elsie, isn't it? You were on duty during the dinner." "Yes, ma'am. I poured the champagne and helped clear after." "Splendid," said Tuppence, lowering her voice. "I only wanted to ask a few harmless questions. Nothing official, just a lady's curiosity." The girl hesitated. "Her ladyship wouldn't like it." "Her ladyship," Tuppence said dryly, "is too busy being gracious to notice." She glanced around. The butler's heavy tread echoed faintly at the far end of the corridor. "You're quite safe. Would you care for a cup of tea? My treat. An hour later, they sat in a small cafe off Grosvenor Street, quiet, discreet, with more chipped china than customers. Elsie's shoulders relaxed as she stirred her tea. I shouldn't talk about what I heard, she began, but I can't forget it. I dream of it. Then tell me, Tuppence said gently. Elsie's voice dropped to a whisper. It was after dessert. I went into the side corridor to fetch more glasses. The door to the study was half open. I heard Sir Montague's voice, angry-like. He said, You'll regret this, Rowena. I won't be silenced. Then her ladyship said something I couldn't quite catch, but the words wire and spark, they stuck in my head. He laughed, horrible it was, and said, You'd never dare. Then I heard footsteps, and I ran. Tuppence felt a prickling at the back of her neck. Wire and spark, she repeated. Are you sure? Elsie nodded earnestly. Certain as anything. Later that night, just before the scream, I saw that singer lady, Miss Vale, near the pantry. She was fussing with the wine-glasses, said she'd dropped her handkerchief, but she didn't look like she was searching for it. More like waiting. Waiting for what? I don't know. The lights flickered, ma'am, and she darted off. Tuppence leaned back. Elsie, that's more helpful than you imagine. Did anyone else know you overheard? The maid's eyes widened. I told no one. Only, well, this morning there was a note under my pillow. It said, Keep quiet if you value your place. I swear I don't know who put it there. Tuppence placed a reassuring hand over hers. You did the right thing telling me. Now, listen carefully. If anything seems odd, you must send word to me or to my husband. Understand? Yes, ma'am, Elsie whispered, clutching her teacup as though it were an anchor. That evening, Tuppence recounted the story to Tommy over dinner. He listened, brow furrowed. Wire and spark, he mused. It fits our electrical theory. And Lorna Vale near the glasses. More interesting still. She's part of it, Tuppence said. And Rowena, if she wasn't directly involved, she knew something was coming. Tommy buttered his toast absent-mindedly. I'll pay a call on Craddock tomorrow. He can check if Illumina Works used special relay circuits. In the meantime, keep in touch with the girl. I intend to, Tuppence replied. She's frightened enough to see shadows where there are none, but sometimes shadows point to the light. The next morning was grey in that particularly London way, respectable, dull, faintly anxious. Tuppence stopped by Berkeley House to ask for Lady Rowena. Her ladyship is not receiving, the butler intoned. Then I won't receive her either, Tuppence said sweetly. I merely wish to return something to Elsie. Elsie? The butler's brows knitted. She isn't here, madam. Didn't report for duties this morning. Tuppence's stomach tightened. When did you last see her? Last night, before supper. She was sent on an errand but didn't come back. An errand to where? The butler hesitated. I believe she mentioned a letter to post, her ladyship's instructions. Tuppence smiled politely, concealing her alarm. Thank you. I'll call again later. Outside, she flagged a cab. Driver, Upper Baker Street, quickly. She waited at the same cafe where they'd spoken. The teacup Elsie had used still sat on the tray beside their corner table, its ring faint on the saucer. But the girl did not appear. After half an hour, Tuppence's nerves began to itch. She left the cafe, scanning the pavement. A gust of wind tugged something pale from beneath a bench, a scarf, white with a faint embroidered E. Tuppence picked it up, pulse quickening. Beneath it lay a small brown envelope smudged with fingerprints. Across its front, in trembling pencil, If anything happens to me. Back at the flat, Tommy found her at the writing desk, envelope open. Good Lord, he said, seeing her face. What's happened? She's gone, Tommy. Vanished. Tuppence pushed the contents toward him. A single folded scrap of paper, yellowed and technical. This was inside. He spread it carefully. Blueprint fragment, electrical circuit. See here, marked ballroom secondary current, and these initials J.W. Illumina. The chandelier's wiring, Tuppence said grimly. She must have found it somewhere, perhaps slipped from the installer's papers. Tommy studied the lines. It shows a separate loop running to the chandelier frame, timed by relay. Someone altered it deliberately. Not poison, Tuppence. Electricity. She nodded, pale but steady. She said she overheard talk of wire and spark. That wasn't metaphor. It was murder. Tommy reached for the telephone. Craddock needs to see this. Inspector Craddock arrived an hour later, bringing the faint smell of wet serge and pipe tobacco with him. He accepted tea, examined the blueprint, and whistled low. "You're right, Mrs. Beresford, this is no ordinary circuit. Whoever added this meant business." "And the maid?" Tuppence asked. "We'll make inquiries, but London's full of alleys and silence." He folded the paper. "Mind if I keep this?" "On one condition," Tuppence said. "You tell me if you find her." "I will." Craddock hesitated, then added quietly, "if she's still to be found." That night, Tuppence lay awake listening to the faint ticking of the clock. Tommy's steady breathing beside her was no comfort. The house seemed full of unseen currents. She rose, slipping into her dressing gown, and crossed to the window. Below, the city lay dim and endless. Somewhere a girl had disappeared because she'd known too much. Her mind replayed Elsie's words, wire and spark, before the lights flickered, waiting. "Waiting for what?" she whispered to the dark. Tommy stirred. "Can't sleep?" "No. I keep thinking of her. She trusted me." He sat up, rubbing his eyes. "We'll find her, Tuppence, but for now, try to rest. We're no use to her half asleep." Tuppence sighed and returned to bed, but her thoughts refused to quiet. She saw again the chandelier, its crystals shimmering like sharp teeth, saw Elsie's frightened eyes across the cafe table. Morning brought no news. Craddock telephoned to report that no trace of the girl had been found. Her lodging house claimed she'd packed a small case and left for a position in Brighton, but no such position existed. "She's been frightened off, or worse," Tuppence said bitterly after the call. "And she left the only proof we have." Tommy handed her coffee. "Proof enough for a theory, at least." "Let's hear it," she said. He pointed to the blueprint. The relay could be set to trigger a charge at a precise time, say, during the toast. Havisham lifts his glass, the current flows, and the contact completes through the metal rim. Instant death, clean as lightning. The spark burns itself out before anyone notices. And Lorna Vale by the pantry? Could have switched it on, or off, or thought she was doing one and achieved the other. Then the missing crystal might have contained a small fuse or time detonator, Tommy finished, removed later to erase evidence. Tuppence shivered. "And Elsie? She heard too much." Tommy's tone hardened. "Yes, which means we're getting close." That evening, as they prepared to go out, a knock sounded. Tommy opened the door to find a small boy holding a sealed envelope. "For Mrs. Beresford," he said. "A lady gave me sixpence to bring it." Tuppence tore it open. Inside was a scrap of paper. 3 words only, scrawled in haste. "They know everything." Tommy met her eyes. "Elsie?" "I don't know," Tuppence whispered, "but whoever wrote it, someone's running out of time." Funerals, Tuppence Beresford always thought, had a curious way of resembling the social events that preceded them. The same faces appeared, dressed in darker fabrics and heavier perfume, offering sympathy with the same precision they once offered gossip. Sir Montague Havisham's funeral was no exception. The chapel at St. Stephen's, Knightsbridge, overflowed with London's well-fed conscience, industrialists, politicians, and ladies whose furs whispered louder than their prayers. Tuppence adjusted her black hat and murmured to Tommy, "I wonder if one must RSVP to death in this crowd." He smiled faintly. "Probably by cheque." They slipped into a pew near the back. At the front, Lady Beatrice Havisham sat rigid and unblinking, her veil drawn like a curtain between herself and the world. Her face was beautiful in the way a blade is, elegant, sharp, and entirely without softness. Tommy whispered, "Cold as an undertaker's heart." "Or a widow's relief," Tuppence replied. The vicar's voice droned through the eulogies. Words like philanthropist and visionary echoed around the carved stone, yet each syllable rang false to Tuppence's ear, like silver plate pretending to be sterling. When the service ended, mourners spilled into the churchyard. The grey afternoon was filled with the hiss of tyres, the shuffle of shoes, the rustle of veils. Tuppence moved among them with polite curiosity, noting who avoided whose gaze. Lady Rowena stood at a modest distance, her gloved hands clasped tightly. Lord Dalrymple hovered beside her, a tall man with nervous eyes and the habit of smoothing his tie every few seconds. Tuppence approached under the pretext of sympathy. "Lady Rowena," she said warmly, "it's kind of you to attend. I know how deeply Sir Montague's death must have affected you. Rowena's smile flickered. I thought it my duty. Duty, Tuppence repeated. That's such a heavy word for so small a world. Before Rowena could respond, Lady Beatrice swept past, her voice low but cutting. You promised me no one would suspect, she hissed to Dalrymple, the words sharp enough to slice through the polite murmur around them. Dalrymple paled. Beatrice not here. But she had already turned away, gliding toward her motor car like a queen leaving an unworthy court. Tuppence's eyes met Tommy's across the path. A small tilt of her head was all the signal he needed. An hour later, while the mourners dined on cold pheasant and moral superiority at the Havisham townhouse, Tommy slipped quietly into the late Sir Montague's study. The air smelled of cigars and secrets. Heavy drapes muted the daylight, and the desk gleamed with the obsessive order of a man who measured power in inches. He moved quickly, opening drawers with the efficiency of long habit. Receipts, ledgers, correspondence, nothing overtly criminal, yet each too tidy, too curated. He almost gave up when his hand brushed a false panel beneath the desk drawer. Inside, folded with military precision, was a sheaf of letters tied with blue ribbon. Tommy untied them carefully. The handwriting was elegant, decisive. Havisham's. The addressees, however, were not the sort of people one invited to charity dinners. One was a warehouse foreman at Tilbury Docks, another a customs officer recently dismissed for bribery. He skimmed the words, his jaw tightening. The shipments must continue under the charity's name. The Chandelier remains the signal, its lights dim twice for arrival, once for collection. Ensure no interference. Good Lord, Tommy murmured, smuggling under cover of philanthropy. He turned the page. Another letter bore the initials D. Your cut remains untouched, Dalrymple, provided discretion. Rowena suspects nothing. Tommy folded the papers quickly, slipping them into his coat. As he did, a floorboard creaked behind him. He straightened, every sense alert. Mr. Beresford, came a voice, smooth and cool. How unexpected. Lady Beatrice Havisham stood in the doorway, her veil lifted, revealing eyes the colour of polished steel. Ah, Tommy said lightly. You startled me. I was looking for a cloakroom. How resourceful, she said, stepping inside. Most men seek their coats among ledgers, I suppose. He smiled. Old habits. I collect information more easily than umbrellas. Her gaze dropped to the open drawer. You've been reading my husband's affairs. Only professionally. She moved closer, the faint scent of violets preceding her. And what profession would that be, Mr. Beresford? Curiosity, he said simply. My wife and I dabble. Her lips curved faintly. Dabbling can be dangerous. My husband's death has made many people curious. Too curious. He inclined his head. And you, Lady Beatrice? Not curious at all. Her tone hardened. I have no need to pry into matters that died with him. Tommy regarded her thoughtfully. That's a convenient philosophy. Does it extend to your friend Lord Dalrymple? A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed her face. Lord Dalrymple is an associate of my husband's. Nothing more. Of course, Tommy said. Only he looked rather distressed when you reminded him that no one must suspect. For a moment, the mask slipped. You overheard? I make a hobby of it. Her hands clenched around her gloves. You have no idea what you're meddling in. Then enlighten me. She took a step closer. Leave it alone, Mr. Beresford. Whatever you think you've found, it isn't worth your life. He smiled pleasantly. My wife tends to disagree on such matters. Before she could answer, the hallway clock chimed. She turned sharply toward the door. The guests will wonder where I've gone. I suggest you find that cloakroom quickly. When she left, Tommy exhaled slowly. Touchy, he muttered. He closed the drawer and slipped out the side door toward the library, where Tuppence had promised to keep the mourners conversationally occupied. She was doing precisely that. The drawing-room hummed with genteel malice. A group of ladies murmured over the quality of the floral arrangements, while two men in black coats debated whether the deceased's will would survive his widow. Tuppence stood by the window with Lord Dalrymple, her tone sympathetic, her eyes predatory. So sudden, she was saying. You must have been very close. Dalrymple gave a humourless laugh. Close enough to regret it. Regret requires conscience, Tuppence said. I'm sure that's quite exhausting. He blinked. Pardon? Oh, nothing, she said smoothly. You must miss his generosity. Dalrymple's mouth tightened. Havisham was a fool. He thought money bought silence, but it buys only echoes. And yet, Tuppence murmured, some echoes carry secrets, such as what he meant to signal with that chandelier. He froze, eyes darting. What do you know of that? Only that it dimmed twice before he died, she said lightly. A curious coincidence. Dalrymple's fingers twitched. Coincidences are the refuge of the ignorant. Then you must feel quite at home. Before he could retort, Lady Beatrice's voice called sharply from across the room. Lord Dalrymple, if you please. He bowed stiffly and withdrew. Tuppence sighed. If looks could indict, she murmured. Tommy appeared beside her. They almost did. I found letters. Our late philanthropist was a smuggler. Her brows rose. Using the charity as a front? Exactly. The chandelier served as a signal, light patterns for shipments. Then the toast, Tuppence said slowly, wasn't only social. Perhaps the signal was meant to reach someone outside, and someone tampered with it instead. Tommy nodded. Beatrice knows something. She warned me off with more sincerity than grief. And Dalrymple? Terrified and involved. They exchanged a look. Beneath the polite murmur of conversation, the air in the room seemed to tighten, humming faintly with secrets, like the chandelier that had once glittered above death. Later, as they walked home through the quiet streets, Tuppence broke the silence. I dislike funerals. Everyone pretends to bury one man, when in fact they're burying the truth. Tommy glanced at her. You think Beatrice killed him? No, she's protecting something, or someone. Her fear feels second-hand. Dalrymple, perhaps. Or Rowena, Tuppence said thoughtfully. She looked like a woman trapped by her own loyalty. Tommy's tone turned wry. And you, my dear, look like a woman who's just decided to walk into another trap. Of course, she said cheerfully. It's the only way to find out who set it. That night, the letters lay spread across their table, blue ribbon discarded. Tuppence traced one line with her fingertip. The chandelier remains the signal. Imagine, she said softly. All that brilliance meant to guide thieves, not dazzle dancers. Tommy smiled faintly. The line between spectacle and crime has always been thin. She folded the letter carefully. Then we'd better learn who pulled the switch, and why the spark killed the wrong man. He poured her a cup of tea. To the dead? To the truth, Tuppence said, raising hers. It's usually less polite, but far more illuminating. The club was the kind of place that tried too hard to forget its own shabbiness. A haze of cigarette smoke softened the cracks in the ceiling. The pianist played as if the keys owed him money, and the clientele nursed drinks like confessions they weren't yet ready to make. Soho after dark had many faces. This one wore rouge and regret. Tuppence sat at a corner table, a small lamp glowing amber between her gloves. She'd chosen her seat carefully, close enough to the stage for Lorna Vale to notice her, far enough that no one else would. On stage, Lorna began her set. She wore a gown of faded blue silk, its shimmer dulled by time, her blonde hair piled in an imitation of glamour that fooled no one. The song, something wistful about promises in spring, hung fragile in the smoke. Her voice had the ache of a life lived too loudly and too long ago, and when she reached the refrain, her eyes met Tuppence's. For an instant the mask slipped. Fear lived behind the mascara. Tuppence applauded lightly when the song ended, ignoring the tepid response from the rest of the room. The singer gave a half bow, then vanished behind the curtain. Tuppence waited a moment, then rose. She found the dressing rooms with the ease of someone who had made a habit of following her curiosity into inconvenient places. The narrow corridor smelled of talc and gin. Lorna was sitting at her mirror, removing her earrings with trembling fingers. Her reflection caught Tuppence's approach and she stiffened. "We're closed," she said without turning. "I'm not here for a drink," Tuppence replied, smiling gently. "I'm here for a word." "I don't talk to strangers." "Then let's fix that. I'm Mrs. Beresford." The name caused a flicker, recognition perhaps, or dread. "I know who you are," Lorna said quietly. "You were at Berkeley House." "Yes," Tuppence said, "and so were you." Lorna turned slowly. Up close, She looked older than her stage persona allowed, her face beautiful but brittle, like glass that had been mended once too often. "I shouldn't have gone," she whispered. "I told them I wouldn't, but they made me." "Who made you?" "Don't." Lorna pressed her hands over her face. "Please, I can't." Tuppence moved closer, lowering her tone to something conspiratorial. "I'm not the police. I only want to know why Sir Montague Havisham died beneath a chandelier that was meant to sparkle, not kill." Lorna looked up sharply. "You think I had something to do with that?" "I think," Tuppence said calmly, "that you know who did." For a moment, silence hummed between them. The muffled thump of bass from the main room filled the gap, followed by laughter that sounded too brittle to be genuine. Finally, Lorna exhaled shakily. "He ruined me once already. I wasn't going to let him do it again." "Havisham," she nodded. "I sang at one of his private parties years ago, before the scandal. He promised introductions, a new contract. Then he wanted more than that. When I refused, he made sure every club closed its doors to me. My name was dirt by morning." Tuppence's voice softened. "And yet, he called you back." Lorna gave a bitter laugh. "He didn't call, he summoned. Said he had a job that might clear my debts. I only had to deliver an envelope to Lady Rowena Chulcott the night of the charity dinner." "An envelope?" "Yes. He said it contained documents for the charity accounts, but he was lying. It was leverage, something to keep her in line." Tuppence frowned. "Did you see what was inside?" "No. He told me curiosity would be the death of me. I thought it was just words. Then he mentioned the chandelier. The word hung in the air like a spark. What about it?" "He said it was to signal a friend. The lights would flash twice, 2 short bursts of brilliance, and then fade. He said it would mean the deal was complete, but it didn't fade, did it?" Lorna's voice trembled. "It flared. I saw it. Then he fell." Tuppence leaned forward. "So the chandelier was rigged?" "Yes." Lorna's hands twisted in her lap. "He had a man do it, a technician from the theatre. I was told to keep quiet, to hand the envelope to Lady Rowena and leave before midnight. But when the lights flickered, I knew something had gone wrong. I ran." "And the envelope?" "Rowena took it." "Do you know what was inside?" "No, but she looked terrified." Tuppence considered. "And you think that fear still follows her?" Lorna hesitated, then nodded. "He said if anything happened to him, others would pay. I thought he meant debts, but he meant death." A sound broke the moment, the soft click of something metallic, barely audible over the distant piano. Tuppence's eyes darted to the window. "Keep talking," she murmured, standing slowly. "Do you have enemies, Miss Vale?" "I've had nothing but," Lorna said with a trembling smile. "Then we may be about to meet one." The shot shattered the window. Glass exploded inward, scattering across the dressing table like diamonds. Lorna screamed, clutching her shoulder as she fell sideways against the chair. Tuppence ducked instinctively, dragging her behind the vanity. "Keep your head down!" Another shot followed, splintering the mirror. Powder puffed across the air like smoke. Tuppence darted to the door and wrenched it open. "Tommy!" she called. A familiar voice answered from the corridor. "I'm here!" He burst in, revolver drawn, eyes sweeping the room. "Good God!" "Window!" she cried. Tommy crossed the room in 2 strides, leaned out through the shattered pane, and spotted a figure retreating down the alley, a tall man in a cap, disappearing into the fog of neon and noise. He vaulted through the window without a second thought. Tuppence knelt beside Lorna. Blood soaked her sleeve, but not deeply. The bullet had grazed her arm. "It's all right," she said firmly. "You're not badly hurt. Hold this." Lorna's face was white. "He meant it," she whispered. "He said they'd kill me if I talked." "Well, you're not dead yet," Tuppence said, pressing a scarf against the wound, "and I don't intend to let them finish the job." From outside came the echo of footsteps and a brief shout, then silence. A minute later, Tommy climbed back through the window, breathing hard. Lost him. Vanished into the labyrinth. Soho's streets breed phantoms. "Did you see his face?" "No, only his stride, determined, not panicked. He knew where he was going." Tuppence nodded grimly. "Then he's done it before." Tommy looked at Lorna. "Is she—" "Shaken, but alive," Tuppence said. "We'll take her to a doctor." "No hospitals," Lorna said weakly. "They'll find me there." Tuppence met Tommy's eyes. "Our flat, then. She'll be safe enough for tonight." Later, in the warm lamplight of their sitting room, Lorna sat on the sofa with a bandaged arm and a cup of tea she hadn't touched. The colour had returned to her cheeks, but her eyes still darted toward every sound. Tommy stood by the window, watching the street below. "Craddock's men are patrolling the area," he said. "They'll find nothing. Whoever fired that shot was a professional." Tuppence poured herself a fresh cup and settled opposite Lorna. "You've done well, my dear. You've told us enough to save your life if you'll let us use it." Lorna's laugh was hollow. "Save my life? I've been dead for years. Only the songs remember me now?" "Then let's give them a new verse," Tuppence said softly. "Tell me again about the chandelier." Lorna's fingers traced the rim of her cup. "He said it was a signal, but I think it became a trap. Someone rewired it, not for light, but for death. Maybe Rowena, maybe Dalrymple, I don't know. All I know is that Havisham meant to expose someone that night." "Expose?" Tommy repeated. "Yes. He kept records, ledgers, letters, proof that the charity money was being diverted. He was going to make a spectacle of it. That's why the chandelier was to flash twice, a warning or perhaps an announcement." "And instead," Tuppence said, "it delivered judgment." Lorna nodded faintly. "I only wanted to survive, but every time I sing I wonder if the lights will fall again." Tommy paced. "She's right, Tuppence. Someone tried to silence her because she holds the missing link. The envelope and the wiring connect Rowena, Dalrymple and Havisham, and whoever rigged that chandelier hasn't finished cleaning up." Tuppence turned to Lorna. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk to Inspector Craddock. You'll tell him what you told us." Lorna looked terrified. "They'll kill me." "Not while we're around," Tommy said briskly. But his cheer was forced, and Tuppence caught the edge of worry beneath it. When Lorna finally fell asleep on the sofa, Tuppence stood beside him by the window. The street lamps cast long, trembling shadows on the curtains. "She's the key," Tuppence whispered. "Someone shot at her to erase the last witness." "Or the last liability," Tommy said. "Havisham's death wasn't revenge, it was containment. And now the walls are closing in." She folded her arms. "We'll have to move quickly. Dalrymple's nervous, Beatrice is desperate, Rowena's terrified. One of them set that chandelier, but all three know why." Tommy nodded. "Then tomorrow we pull the thread. Let's see which of our fine society unravels first." Tuppence glanced back at Lorna, sleeping uneasily, her lips twitching as if reciting lyrics from a forgotten tune. "Poor girl," she murmured. "Even her songs are haunted." Tommy placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll see that the next verse ends differently." Outside, a cab rolled past, its headlights flaring briefly across the glass like a spark, sharp, white and gone. Tuppence turned toward it, thoughtful. "A spark," she said softly. "It always begins with one." By the next morning, a fragment, a torn edge of blueprint no larger than a handkerchief, lay on the Beresfords' breakfast table beneath the magnifying lamp. Tommy adjusted the lens, his brow furrowed. "You know, Tuppence, I think we've been underestimating this chandelier. It's not just a pretty bauble, it's practically an executioner's instrument." Tuppence poured herself coffee, the sound filling the silence like a small storm. "You've been saying that since Tuesday. Have you now found proof to match your melodrama?" He grinned faintly. "Proof, no. Suggestion, plenty." He tapped the blueprint with a pencil. "See these lines? Not standard wiring. Whoever modified this wanted more control than your average light switch could provide. There's a secondary loop, feeds back into itself. And this symbol here, a relay timer. Someone could have sent a surge of current at a precise moment." Tuppence leaned over, her perfume mingling with the faint tang of metal and paper. "Enough to kill?" "More than enough, especially if the victim happened to be holding something conductive. A champagne glass, say." Her expression sharpened. "So the toast wasn't symbolic, it was strategic." "Exactly." She sank into her chair, eyes distant. "Then poor Sir Montague wasn't poisoned at all. He was electrocuted by a chandelier meant to sparkle." Tommy nodded grimly. "A silent killer, neat as science." They exchanged a glance heavy with understanding. Then Tuppence's lips curved in wry amusement. "I suppose this means we'll have to ruin someone else's evening at Berkeley House." That afternoon, Inspector Craddock met them in his office at Scotland Yard, looking as though the world had conspired to rob him of sleep and faith in humanity. "Beresford," he sighed, "if I let you two into Berkeley House again, my superiors will think I'm running a sightseeing service." "Think of it as civic engagement," Tuppence said sweetly. Tommy laid the blueprint fragment on the desk. "We're not chasing shadows, Inspector. This shows a secondary power source tied to the chandelier chain. You'll see the relay marking here." Craddock squinted. "You mean to tell me that thing could have been wired to—" "To kill, yes," Tommy finished. "Not by accident, by design." Craddock rubbed his chin. "And you think whoever did it used the champagne toast as the trigger moment?" Tuppence nodded. "A toast of old debts repaid. Poetic, don't you think?" Craddock exhaled slowly. "All right, I'll authorize a site inspection, after dark, when the house is empty. But if we find nothing—" "We'll treat you to dinner," Tommy said cheerfully. "Make it a month's worth," Craddock muttered. Berkeley House stood silent under the veil of night, its windows dark, its grandeur reduced to shapes and memory. The Beresfords arrived just before midnight, armed with flashlights, gloves, and the inspector's reluctant company. Inside, the echo of their footsteps was almost reverent. The ballroom, stripped of guests and laughter, looked vast and ghostly. The chandelier hung motionless above, crystals glinting like teeth in the dim light. Tuppence shivered slightly. "It's strange, isn't it? Even empty, the place feels watched." Tommy crouched by the nearest column, running his hand along the skirting board. "Electricity always leaves a trail," he murmured. Craddock switched on his torch. "So where do we begin, Professor?" Tommy pointed toward the corner panel. "Under the floor. If the chandelier's current was modified, there'll be a junction box somewhere nearby." They pried up the wooden boards carefully, revealing a nest of wires coiled like sleeping snakes. Tommy's light traced them to a metal box bolted against the support beam. "There it is," he breathed. "Look, secondary relay and— hello!" A timer mechanism. Craddock crouched beside him, whistling low. "I'll be damned." Tuppence, peering over their shoulders, said softly, "So it's true." Tommy nodded, eyes alight with grim satisfaction. Whoever set this could determine the exact second of the surge. Once the timer was wound, bang, 1,000 volts through that chain. Craddock frowned. "Enough to kill instantly?" "Enough to stop the heart before the glass hit the floor." Tuppence's voice was quiet. "A murder dressed as a heart attack. It's almost elegant if it weren't monstrous." Tommy unscrewed the relay cover carefully. Inside, a set of fingerprints had been left in dust, smudges across the brass dial. He looked up. "Craddock, I hope your men brought a dusting kit." The inspector called one of his constables forward, and together they worked in silence, lifting prints from the surface. When they developed under the powder, Craddock straightened with a low whistle. "Lady Rowena's sure enough, but—" He leaned closer. "Wait, there's another set." Tommy took the flashlight. "Whose?" Craddock's face darkened. "Lord Dalrymple." For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Tuppence broke it with a low murmur. The politician with nervous eyes. He was there that night, standing beside the butler when the lights flickered. Tommy straightened. And he had reason to silence Havisham. The smuggling ring, Dalrymple's name appeared in the letters. Craddock nodded grimly. If Havisham planned to expose him, that would do it. "But why Rowena's fingerprints too?" Tuppence asked. "She couldn't have been complicit. She's terrified." Tommy considered. Maybe she touched the timer later, out of curiosity or guilt, or perhaps she tried to stop it. "Or start it," Craddock said. "Don't rule anything out." They replaced the boards and stood in silence for a long moment, staring up at the chandelier. In the torchlight it glittered coldly, as if aware of their discovery. Tuppence said softly, "It's strange how beauty hides danger. That thing was designed to dazzle, but it killed instead." Tommy smiled faintly. "That's civilization for you. We disguise murder with manners." Craddock shot him a look. "Save the philosophy for your memoirs. I'll have the lab confirm those prints. In the meantime, I want both Lady Rowena and Lord Dalrymple under discreet observation." Tuppence glanced at the chandelier once more before turning away. "Make it very discreet, Inspector. Whoever built this has a habit of tidying up loose ends." Back at the flat, dawn was already softening the sky. Tuppence poured them each a cup of tea as Tommy spread his notes across the desk. "So," she said, Dalrymple wired the chandelier to kill Havisham, but Lady Rowena's involvement complicates things. Tommy nodded absently, eyes scanning the blueprint again. I think she knew, maybe even feared it. She might have been blackmailed into silence. Havisham's death saved her reputation but destroyed her nerve. Do you believe she loved him? I believe she loved her husband's memory, and Havisham insulted it. Perhaps that's motive enough for secrecy, if not for murder. Tuppence sighed. And Lorna Vale, she's still terrified. She says the chandelier was meant as a signal, not a weapon. Tommy looked up. Maybe it was both, a signal to smugglers and a trap for traitors. Whoever controlled the current held power over everyone in that room. She sipped her tea thoughtfully. Dalrymple seems more coward than killer, though. Nervous men rarely choose electricity as their weapon. Unless they had help, Tommy said quietly. Someone who knew how to wire, how to hide the mechanism. Someone inside the house. The butler? He nodded. Or the technician from Illumina, the one who installed the special wiring. We've yet to meet Mr. Barker properly. Tuppence smiled faintly. You sound almost excited, darling. Tommy grinned. I do love a good tangle of circuits and suspects. The clock on the mantel chimed softly. Outside, London yawned awake, the clatter of carts, the distant call of a newsboy. Tuppence stood, crossing to the window. Tommy, she said quietly, we're in deep now. Someone shot at Lorna Vale last night. They won't hesitate to strike again if we get close. He joined her, resting a hand lightly on her shoulder. Then we'd better stay ahead of the current, hadn't we? She smiled. You always did enjoy your electricity puns. Just keeping the mood light, she groaned softly. That's 2 in 1 sentence. If you make another, I'll switch you off. He laughed, and for a moment the heaviness lifted. But beneath the humour, unease coiled like wire under tension. Tommy turned back to the blueprint, tracing the faint looping lines that had once carried death. You know, Tuppence, I used to think murder was an art. Now I see it's an engineering problem. And the artist? She asked quietly. He looked up, eyes dark, still hidden behind the chandelier. Later that morning, a telegram arrived from Inspector Craddock. Prince confirmed. Rowena and Dalrymple both present on timer. Advise caution. Meeting requested at Scotland Yard 7 p.m. Tuppence read it aloud, her voice tight. They both touched the mechanism. Together or separately? Separately, I'd wager, Tommy said. But the sequence matters. If Dalrymple set it and Rowena adjusted it, then she might have tried to stop the murder, and failed. He nodded. Or worse, tried to alter the timing and caused it herself. Tuppence folded the telegram. Either way, the chandelier was their accomplice, and now perhaps their undoing. Tommy poured himself another cup of tea and smiled grimly. The electric truth, my dear. Shocking, but illuminating. Tuppence sighed. That's the 3rd pun, Tommy. Worth it, he said. She couldn't help but laugh. Come on, Professor. Let's go tell Craddock his chandelier hums with more than light. If ever there was a place to cloak suspicion in civility, it was the Savoy. The chandeliers glimmered like polite smiles, the linen shone with moral purity, and the waiters glided as if gossip were sacrilege. To dine here was to believe, if only for an hour, that the world was orderly. Tommy Beresford, adjusting his tie with the air of a man about to commit gentle mischief, knew better. You realize, he murmured to Tuppence, that inviting 2 people who despise each other to the same table may not technically qualify as diplomacy. Of course it doesn't, she replied crisply, fastening a pearl earring. That's why it will work. People are never more honest than when they think they're winning an argument. And you'll be in the next booth, she said with a conspiratorial smile, eavesdropping in the name of justice. Tommy sighed, signalling the maitre d'. Then let's hope the Savoy's acoustics are as fine as its menu. At precisely 8 o'clock, Lady Rowena Chalcott arrived. She wore black, not mourning black, but the kind that declared defiance rather than grief. The diamond clasp at her throat caught the candlelight like a heartbeat. Mr. Beresford, she said coolly as she took her seat, you mentioned a matter of importance. I assume it warrants my time. Indeed, Tommy said with perfect courtesy. I thought a private dinner might clarify a few misunderstandings regarding Sir Montague Havisham's death. Rowena's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened on the napkin. And you expect me to believe Scotland Yard's investigations have been outsourced to the Savoy Grill? Tommy smiled. Only temporarily. I find the wine list improves recollection. Before she could answer, a second guest was shown in. Lord Dalrymple, tall, thin, immaculate, his smile stretched tight as wire. "Rowena," he said with false warmth. "How unexpected." "I might say the same," she replied frostily. Tommy rose. "Lord Dalrymple, Lady Rowena, since you already know one another, introductions are unnecessary. Please, sit. The sole item on tonight's menu is the truth." Dalrymple's smile faltered. "I beg your pardon?" "I find," Tommy said pleasantly, "that a shared meal encourages civility, even between those with competing recollections." Tuppence, behind the velvet screen in the adjoining booth, settled her notebook and tilted her head. The first course arrived, oysters on ice which neither guest touched. The silence between them was sharper than the cutlery. Finally Rowena spoke. "You always did enjoy theatre, Dalrymple, though I must say you've outdone yourself this time." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Oh, don't pretend," she said coldly. "Montague told me everything before he died. The embezzled funds, the smuggling through our charity shipments, the bribes disguised as donations. You used my husband's name to cover your crimes." Dalrymple's composure cracked for an instant. "Be careful, Rowena. That sort of accusation can be electrifying." Tommy's fork paused mid-air. He caught the word, filed it. "You betrayed his memory," Rowena pressed on, voice trembling now. "And when he threatened to expose you," he leaned forward. "He threatened us, my dear. Don't paint yourself innocent. You knew exactly what those orphans' crates contained." "That's a lie." "Is it?" His tone turned soft, venomous. "You signed the shipping invoices. Havisham might have discovered the truth, but you profited from it too. So before you play the grieving widow, consider how loudly I might speak if provoked." Rowena's face drained of colour. From behind the screen, Tuppence scribbled quickly. Tommy kept his tone level. "If you've finished rehearsing mutual destruction, perhaps we could discuss facts rather than threats." Dalrymple's eyes flickered toward him, too quickly, too nervously. "Facts? Very well. Fact. Havisham's death was an accident. Fact. The chandelier malfunctioned. Fact. Lady Rowena would benefit from making it appear deliberate." Rowena rose half out of her chair. You monster?" "Sit down," Tommy said sharply. She froze. Something in his voice, quiet but urgent, made her obey. Because in that moment, Tommy saw it. The faintest tremor in the candle flame above them, the light dimming and then brightening again. Once, twice, exactly as before. He turned sharply toward the far wall. A discreet lamp beside the serving table had been fitted with a thin cord trailing to the floor. Unusual, unnecessary. And Dalrymple's cane, propped casually against his knee, had a small brass tip glinting oddly in the light. "Oh, no, you don't," Tommy said under his breath. As the light flickered a third time, he lunged across the table, knocking the cane from Dalrymple's grasp and diving toward the base of the cord. The waiter yelped as the lights above flared white, then cracked with a sound like tearing silk. Sparks flew. A wineglass shattered. Rowena screamed. Dalrymple convulsed once, then slumped back in his chair, his hand still outstretched toward the tablecloth. The smell of ozone filled the air. For a long moment no one moved. Then Tuppence appeared, emerging from the side curtain like a conjured truth. "Tommy!" He was already on his knees, checking for a pulse. "Too late," he said grimly. "He's gone." Rowena stared, trembling. What happened?" Tommy stood slowly, holding up the cane. The brass tip was scorched, blackened. "He wired this," he said. "A concealed trigger. A relay current, same as the chandelier device. He planned to use it tonight." Tuppence's gaze flicked to the lamp cord. "And he nearly did." Rowena clutched the edge of the table, her voice breaking. "You mean he tried to kill me?" "Or frame you," Tommy said quietly. "If you'd touched your glass just then, the current would have passed through. It seems our late lord wished to tidy up loose ends." Craddock arrived 15 minutes later, summoned by telephone. By then, the Savoy's staff had been herded discreetly from the dining room, the curtains drawn tight against the press waiting outside. The inspector bent over Dalrymple's body, shaking his head. "Good heavens, electrocuted in public. That's a new one. Tommy gestured toward the cane. Homemade apparatus. He must have carried the trigger with him, wired to a relay hidden in the lamp socket. Probably set to activate when he pressed the handle's mechanism. Craddock examined it. Clever devil. Too clever, Tuppence said dryly. He forgot that electricity obeys logic, not vanity. Rowena, pale and shaken, whispered, "He wanted to silence me. I told him I wouldn't protect him anymore, that I'd tell you everything." Craddock straightened. Then it seems he decided to silence himself instead. Tuppence met Tommy's gaze. Or fate did the honour for him. Later, when the body had been removed and the official statements taken, the Beresfords sat in the Savoy lounge, their untouched coffee cooling on the tray. "Well," Tuppence said finally, "I suppose that solves the question of who wired the chandelier." "Yes," Tommy said thoughtfully, "but not why." She arched an eyebrow. "Greed seems a sufficient motive. For embezzlement, yes. For murder, perhaps. But there's something more. Dalrymple's scheme was too elaborate to be simple revenge. He meant to destroy reputations, not just lives." Tuppence stirred her coffee absently. "Then perhaps we're not at the end after all." Tommy smiled faintly. "When are we ever?" Craddock returned, notebook in hand. "The technicians confirmed it. The wiring in that cane matches the relay design from the chandelier. He must have used the same craftsman, possibly that Illumina fellow you mentioned." Tommy's eyes lit. "Barker?" "Yes, the electrician who installed the special wiring. He's the missing link." Craddock frowned. "You think he was in on it?" "I think," Tommy said, "that he built the weapons, and someone paid him to." Tuppence rose, smoothing her skirt. "Then we'll find him, and we'll find out who else stood to gain from a dead philanthropist, a ruined widow, and a conveniently silent politician." Craddock sighed. "You're impossible people." "Efficiently impossible," Tuppence said brightly. Outside, the city glittered, street lamps glowing like modest stars, carriages rolling through the wet streets. The Savoy's doors closed behind them with a sigh. Rowena waited beside her motor car, wrapped in a black shawl, her expression drawn. "Mr. Beresford," she said softly, "I owe you my life." "Not at all," he replied. "We merely interrupted a dinner plan gone awry." Tuppence smiled gently. "You were brave tonight, Lady Rowena, but courage isn't the same as freedom. If you truly wish to end this, tell Inspector Craddock everything, every letter, every payment." Rowena hesitated. "There's something I haven't shown you. Montague left a sealed envelope in my safe, a confession of sorts. I believe it explains why he invited Dalrymple that night." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "Then perhaps, Lady Rowena, we should pay your safe a visit." Rowena nodded slowly. "Tomorrow morning. You'll understand everything then." As her car pulled away, Tommy exhaled. "A sealed envelope. They always make me nervous." "Because they usually contain the truth," Tuppence said. He grinned. "Exactly. And truth, my dear, is far more dangerous than electricity." She laughed softly, linking her arm through his. "Then let's be careful not to get shocked." Together they walked into the London night, the Savoy's lights dimming behind them, one final flicker before darkness claimed the scene. Morning had stripped Berkeley House of all its illusions. The ballroom, once glittering with laughter and champagne, now lay hollow and silent, its chandeliers dulled to grey, its parquet floor littered with the ghosts of last week's elegance. Tuppence Beresford paused in the doorway, gloved hand resting lightly on the frame. "You know, Tommy," she murmured, "I never quite trust a room that pretends it's forgotten what happened inside it." Tommy gave a low whistle. "I'll admit, it does look different without the gowns and gossip. Less Versailles, more crime scene." Inspector Craddock, waiting by the mantelpiece, gave them both a weary nod. "You're late," he said. "Fashionably," Tuppence corrected. "Where would you like us to begin, Inspector? At the scene of the crime, or the scene of the cover-up?" Craddock's lips twitched. "You'll find I've already checked the obvious. Nothing left to find except dust and decor." Tommy's gaze rose to the chandelier. "Ah, but that's precisely where truth tends to hide, among the dust and decor." He stepped forward, studying the monstrous thing that had caused so much death and fascination. It hung perfectly still now, each crystal frozen in daylight like a droplet of gilt. "Funny, isn't it?" he said softly. "For all its brilliance, It killed because of light. Tuppence's eyes followed his upward. Even beauty can be weaponized, darling, especially by men with ambition. Craddock cleared his throat. Poetic as ever. If you're finished philosophizing, there's paperwork to close. Tuppence smiled faintly. Not quite finished. There's still one piece missing, and not metaphorically. She began moving about the room with that unhurried curiosity Tommy had learned long ago to respect, the kind that noticed what others didn't. Her gloved fingers traced along the vases, the candelabras, the dustless lines where something had been moved. Then she stopped. "Tommy," she said quietly, "come here." He joined her at the far side of the room, where a tall porcelain vase stood near the window, ornate, floral, and much too large for its purpose. "Don't tell me you've gone into ceramics," he teased. "Hardly." She reached inside delicately and withdrew something small, a fragment of cut glass, faceted and glimmering faintly even in the pale light. Tommy frowned. "A pendant from the chandelier?" She nodded. "The missing one, the one I noticed the night of the murder." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "You mean this little bauble caused all that fuss?" Tuppence turned it between her fingers. "It's no ordinary bauble, Inspector. There's something inside." Tommy leaned closer. The crystal's heart shimmered oddly, like a captured echo. Within, tiny grooves spiraled faintly around a metallic core. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "A recording crystal." Craddock frowned. "A what?" Tommy explained. "They're experimental, designed to capture faint sound vibrations. Military prototypes mostly. Whoever placed this here wanted a record." "And judging by where it was hidden," Tuppence added, "they wanted it found, eventually." Craddock gestured impatiently. "So what's it say then? You don't happen to have a phonograph for diamonds in your handbag?" "As a matter of fact," Tommy said dryly, "I might improvise." He fetched a portable device from his case, one of his little experiments Tuppence privately suspected, to make himself feel like a scientist rather than a detective. Carefully, he placed the pendant within the receiver. Static crackled. Then, faintly, a voice emerged, nasal, self-assured, and unmistakably Dalrymple's. "Not murder? No, not yet. The current will stun him, frighten him enough to comply. Once he signs, I'll reverse it. I need him alive for leverage." A pause, then lower, almost desperate. "If it fails, well, perhaps it's justice. He played God with money. I only play God with light." The recording ended with a sharp hiss. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Craddock exhaled slowly. "So he meant to fake Havisham's death?" Tommy nodded. "To blackmail him, control him. But he miscalculated the current. He killed him outright." Tuppence's gaze drifted upward to the chandelier again. "Electric ambition," she said softly. "He tried to make light his servant and became its victim instead." Craddock pocketed the pendant carefully. "This will close the case, at least officially. The coroner will rule it accidental manslaughter. Dalrymple can't defend himself, and the public likes tidy endings." Tuppence gave a small smile. "But light is never tidy, Inspector. It bends, reflects, refracts. It tells the truth only in fragments." He sighed. "Then perhaps it's best you two keep to fiction. You make reality sound exhausting." They found Lady Rowena in the conservatory, her posture impeccable, her eyes hollow. The sunlight filtering through the glass roof made her seem almost translucent, like a portrait left too long in the sun. When she saw them, she rose. "Is it over?" she asked. "Yes," Tommy said gently. "Dalrymple's confession leaves little doubt. You were right to fear him." She closed her eyes briefly. "I wasn't afraid for myself, only for what my husband's name would become." Tuppence stepped forward, her tone kind. "You loved him still." "Not as he was," Rowena said softly, "but as he used to be, before greed made him cruel. I suppose that's what we all wanted, to preserve illusions. Havisham, Dalrymple, even me. But light," she looked up, her eyes glinting faintly, "has a way of burning illusions away." Tommy inclined his head. "You'll have peace now, Lady Rowena." She smiled faintly, though tears shimmered beneath. "Peace is overrated, Mr. Beresford, but clarity, That's worth any price. Later, as Craddock gathered the last of the evidence and his men packed up the scene, Tommy lingered beneath the chandelier one final time. "Strange thing," he said. "It still sparkles." Tuppence joined him, standing close enough that their reflections mingled in the polished floor. "It's the nature of light, my dear. It insists on shining, even when men misuse it." Tommy smiled sideways. "You're waxing philosophical again." She tilted her head. "Well, someone has to balance your engineering metaphors." He laughed softly. "You know, Tuppence, when we started this case, I thought it would be about greed, but it was about something simpler: control. Dalrymple wanted to control people the way he controlled his machines. And ended up proving," she said gently, "that control is an illusion." He looked up again, following the crystal's slow shimmer in the morning sun. "It's beautiful, though. Even knowing what it did, I can't quite hate it." "Nor should you," she said. "Beauty isn't guilty of the crimes committed in its name." They turned to leave, the polished doors closing behind them with a whisper. Outside, the world was ordinary again. Carriages rolling, vendors shouting, London's rhythm unbroken by one man's folly. Tommy offered his arm and Tuppence took it, her smile half wistful, half amused. "Even light has its secrets, darling," she said as they walked, "especially when men try to control it." He chuckled. "Remind me never to install new chandeliers." "Quite right," she said. "Next time, let's stick to tea lamps." Their laughter echoed softly as they stepped into the bright morning, two silhouettes walking away from the house that had tried to make light obey, and behind them, high in its ceiling cradle, the crystal chandelier caught the sun once more, scattering its secrets into 1,000 silent prisms. "Tommy, I refuse to sit directly beneath that lamp ever again," said Tuppence, pointing her butter knife accusingly at the ceiling of their cheerful Chelsea flat. "It may not be a chandelier, but I don't trust anything with wiring anymore." Tommy looked up from his newspaper, expression serene. "Darling, that's an innocent lampshade. It's never so much as flickered at you." "Today it's innocent," she said, folding her arms. "Tomorrow it could be rigged with enough voltage to make my hair permanently fashionable." He grinned. "Then think of the savings on salon appointments." She glared. "You're insufferable." "True," he admitted, "but alive, which is more than can be said for certain politicians we've dined with recently." Tuppence sighed and dropped into the armchair opposite him. The morning sunlight spilled through the lace curtains, laying a soft glow across the tea tray. There was comfort in the clink of china, the smell of toast, the faint hum of post-war London returning to its business beyond the window. For a moment, silence stretched between them, comfortable like an old cardigan. Then Tuppence spoke again, quieter now. "It's rather ghastly when you think of it. Dalrymple, all that brilliance and cunning, wasted on greed." Tommy folded the paper. "Greed often wears refinement. It's the same disease, just dressed for dinner." She gave him a sidelong look. "You're growing almost philosophical. Shall I worry?" "Not unless I start quoting the Bible before breakfast." He reached for his cup. "But really, Tuppence, it's remarkable how predictable people can be. Give them enough money, or fear of losing it, and even the cleverest of men will start inventing reasons to destroy themselves." "Poetic justice," she said, "though I prefer my justice without risk of electrocution." Tommy chuckled. "So noted. No more cases involving electricity." "No more cases involving chandeliers," she corrected firmly, "or lords with twitchy moustaches, or widows who cry without smudging their mascara." "That does limit our client list," he said dryly. She smiled. "I've decided to specialize exclusively in mysteries involving tea trays, garden gossip, and misdelivered letters." "I'll take the misdelivered letters," Tommy said. "At least they don't explode." The clock on the mantel ticked with domestic satisfaction. Tuppence poured him another cup, then leaned back with a sigh. "You know, I do wonder what Lady Rowena will do now." "She'll survive," Tommy said. "She has the resilience of her class, guilt polished into grace." Tuppence tilted her head. "I suppose she was the one who suffered most, really. Losing her husband, her reputation, her illusions, all in one go." "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "but she gained truth. That's not nothing." "Truth is overrated," Tuppence said with mock gravity. "A nice lie with a happy ending is far more comfortable." Tommy raised his brows. "That's what marriage is for. She threw a cushion at him. It missed by inches and thumped into the piano. He laughed, dodging another that followed. "Tuppence, really? I thought we'd agreed to keep violence out of the domestic sphere." "Only verbal violence," she said sweetly, reclaiming her seat. A soft knock interrupted their sparring. Albert, their eternally rumpled office assistant, appeared in the doorway holding the Morning Post. "Letter for you, Mrs. B," he said. "Looks posh, crest and all." "Thank you, Albert," she said, taking it. "Do try not to trip over the umbrella stand again." He flushed. "Wasn't my fault last time, Mrs. B. It moved." "Of course it did," she said kindly. When the door closed, she turned the envelope over. "From Lady Rowena." Tommy set down his cup. "Open it before it combusts, would you?" Tuppence slit the seal carefully and unfolded the crisp stationery. The handwriting was elegant but faintly tremulous. "My dear Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, I wanted you both to know that the chandelier has been donated to the National Museum of Decorative Arts. It will hang there as an exhibit, its brilliance admired, its history quietly omitted. The curator tells me it shall never again be connected to any current. I find comfort in that thought. Thank you for bringing light where darkness hid. With gratitude and peace, Rowena Chalcott." Tuppence read the letter aloud, her voice softening. When she finished, she laid it on the table between them. "Well," she said, "that's that. The Chandelier's career as a murderer is officially over." Tommy smiled faintly. "And fitting, really. A museum where it can shine harmlessly. Beauty in captivity." She sipped her tea. "I suppose that's all any of us are in the end. Illusions displayed under the right lighting." "Good heavens," he said. "Now you're the philosopher." "I learned from the best." He lifted his cup toward her. "To mysteries solved and marriages unshocked." She laughed, clinking her cup gently against his. "And to the electricians of England, unsung heroes of domestic safety." They drank in companionable silence, the kind that said more than words could. Outside, a milkman's whistle floated faintly up from the street, followed by the rumble of a passing bus. Life, indifferent to tragedy or triumph, went briskly on. Tuppence rose and moved toward the window, looking out over the rooftops. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that we're rather lucky, Tommy? All the danger, all the nonsense, and yet we end up here, alive, with tea and toast." He joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "Luck has very little to do with it. I'd say it's mostly your stubbornness," she smiled, "and your bad jokes." "Essential to our survival," he agreed. They stood there a moment, the city's hum mingling with the gentle tick of the clock. The morning light caught her hair, turning it to gold. Tuppence turned, her expression thoughtful. "You know, Tommy, I think domestic peace is every bit as mysterious as murder." He looked amused. "How so?" "Well," she said, settling back into her chair, "it requires equal parts patience, cunning, and luck, and the occasional deduction about who finished the last of the marmalade." Tommy chuckled. "Then perhaps we should open a new case, the mystery of the vanishing breakfast condiments." "Only if you're the chief suspect." "Always," he said, with mock solemnity. Tuppence raised her cup once more, eyes bright with humour and affection. "To mysteries solved, then, and the ones that never end." Tommy clinked his against hers again. "To us, Tuppence, the world's most persistent pair of incurable detectives." And as the clock chimed 11, the sunlight grew stronger, scattering across the tea things until every spoon, every plate, every crumb of toast gleamed with harmless light, proof that even after darkness, some mysteries conclude in laughter, warmth, and the comforting aroma of fresh tea.